During this global pandemic and era of social distancing, I've been doing my interviews from home. This is where I spoke with John, who is the President and Executive Director of Asian Americans Advancing Justice, based in Washington, D.C. His organization fights for Asian American civil rights through education, litigation, and public policy advocacy.
We are in a time when people are fearful, and that's the reality. We are under the COVID-19 environment. Everyone is fearful, and there's a realness to that. But that fear shouldn't translate to hate. That fear shouldn't translate to racism. And in that sense, that is where I have concern for the Asian American community right now. I have concern that Asian Americans are getting stereotyped, are getting targeted for reasons that have to do with more misinformation than real information.
John is an experienced attorney with more than 2 decades of policy, litigation, and corporate experience. He served as a senior advisor to U.S. President Barack Obama during his administration. Since the pandemic started, the organization he leads has collected and tracked hate crimes and other racist events through its website, Stand Against Hatred. Give me some personal stories. I mean, have you been affected? What are some of the things? I mean, I'm sure you hear the stories. What are some that really resonate with you?
A couple of really resonate. The Texas story in particular, where a father and his 2 young children were stabbed outside of a Sam's Club by a person that blamed him for bringing the virus to the United States. It really affects me in part because I am a father of 2 kids, and to think of a father having to live that experience really resonates in terms of why it matters in terms of the work that we do. I think about a woman that was doused with acid right outside her own house while taking out the garbage. Again, such a common everyday experience that all of us do on a weekly basis, and to have that become a moment when you are in fear of your life, when you are attacked, it violates the very safety of literally your own home in that case. So those incidents certainly resonate. And then all of the microaggressions or the micro incidents taken together, and these are the racial epithets. These are the small things that happen where people say, go back to your own country or get away from me. That taken together really causes us to worry about sort of where we are headed, but just how Asian Americans are viewed right now in this moment.
The reporting forum Stop AAPI Hate is also tracking anti-Asian incidents. So far, it's seen about 2,600 episodes from March 19th through the end of August. They range from verbal to physical attacks against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. They are happening all across the United States. Social media is playing a big role in publicizing race-motivated attacks, such as these videos that went viral.
Ain't got no law underneath of you. I can say whatever I want. First Amendment.
Should we call the police?
Go to your own country. Go to your own country, dreamer. Bye. I stand up for you.
Tell them to move. Move. You stupid.
Okay. Okay. Oh. Okay. He just assaulted me. This man had just assaulted me.
What can be done in the face of this sort of discrimination?
There's a number of things, I think. Number one is this sort of discussion, just addressing it head on and saying, this is stuff that we are seeing. In fact, it was very heartening. I've done a number of these types of interviews, and one time I was walking my neighborhood, as we all are in COVID-19, to get our exercise, and a neighbor of mine that we're friendly with said, hey, I saw you on one of these interviews, and she actually said, on behalf of white people, I want to apologize for the behavior of some of my colleagues. And that was meaningful to me, because it was meaningful in that it suggested that talking about these issues is helpful, because then it brings it to the fore. It makes our allies, not just in the Asian American community or Black community, Latino community, but the white community, take note and find ways to support us. And that translates also into another area, which is just having these allies intervene when they need to, right? I've talked about these hate incidents that have occurred. One of the beautiful things that happened is in that Sam's Club incident, a person came in and stopped the attacker and said, whoa, this is wrong, and really kept that incident from getting even worse. And that's also what we need in this moment, is having people be allies by intervening. And that's certainly something that my organization is working on in terms of training people how to do that.
I was reading here you've got a bystander training program. Talk to us about what you teach there.
Sure. And this is a wonderful program. So this is a program that we actually started and redeveloped in the COVID-19 age. So, we saw this anti-Asian racism happening. We saw this bullying, we saw these attacks, and we said, okay, what can we do about it? Obviously, we could educate the media and tell them that using racist terms is wrong and help turn the table that way with the narrative. But what about the individual people that are feeling this on the ground? And so one thing that we realized would be helpful is teaching people how to respond in these moments. And through a partnership with an organization called Hollaback, a partnership that we've had for a while, we developed this bystander intervention training. So what is this? It's really simple. It's giving people common sense techniques to do something if you see an incident of hate, right? So if you're on the subway and you see someone start hurling racial epithets at someone that's Asian, then there's a couple of things you could do. First, we want you to be physically safe. We don't want you to be a superhero. We don't want you to do something that would put yourself in harm's way. But there's little things you can do, whether it's simply asking that victim, hey, are you okay? Helping that victim to get to wherever she or he needs to go. Whether it is calling over a public transit official to help out with the situation. If you feel powerful enough, if you are a 6'2" football player that feels like you're in this position that you could do it, you could call out the racism and tell that person, that's not okay, stop that, right? You get other people to come in to be involved, to help record the incident, right? And then you can help to report that afterwards. Because all of these pieces help to de-escalate the situation, helps to make the victim be in a better place, right? Because we're trying to reduce the trauma of the victim. So those are the types of things that we teach. It's a very simple 1-hour course that we are doing by webinar. And we've trained in 4 months over 12,000 people.
What are the takeaways from some of those people? What do you hear back from them?
We're hearing that it's empowering. Now, so what's interesting is, on one level, we hope they never have to use it, right? Because that means that they are not seeing a racist incident. But what we are hearing is that now they know what to do, number one. And number two is that not only do they feel like they are able to help others, but they feel more comfort in themselves, more confident in themselves about, I know how to respond to this situation. One of the things when we polled these individuals prior to starting the training about why they would not respond in a situation is, they always respond, I'm not sure if I know what to do. I'm not sure if I would make the situation worse. So by this simple training, and when I say simple, they're very often common sense techniques. It really emboldens people, empowers people to say, okay, I'm confident now that this is okay to do.
U.S. President Donald Trump often refers to COVID-19 as the Chinese virus. He defends the use of the phrase because the virus comes from China.
It's not racist at all, no, not at all. It comes from China. That's why. It comes from China.
But public health officials have warned against naming infectious diseases in any way that could have discriminatory effects on people or nations. So I was mentioning this health official with the WHO saying that these words may seem trivial unless you're one of the people affected, and he's right. So talk to me about how painful it is to hear the president speak in the way he does.
It's very painful because it has a direct effect on people. And what I mean by that is we have individuals that are afraid to come out of their house for fear of being targeted for hate incidents, racial epithets, and the like. And if you think about it, it's silly. What I mean by it's silly is that there's no benefit to calling it a Chinese virus. Science and medicine all agree that there's no benefit to that. It's a virus that knows no borders. But there is a clear cost, a cost to the community in terms of the fear and potential violence that causes. The other thing that strikes me about all of this is that there's a reason that the WHO, the CDC agree that we shouldn't use this. A lot of people early on in this pandemic, when we started criticizing the use of the word Chinese viruses, they said, well, we always called it the Spanish flu. What was wrong with that? Why are you changing that? And actually, the reason is the Spanish flu is a good example of why we shouldn't use these terms. The Spanish flu most likely started in Kansas. The only reason they called it the Spanish flu was because it was World War I. The US did not want to claim it as their own problem. The Germans did not want to claim it as their own problem. Spain was neutral, and as a result, they both agreed to call it the Spanish flu. As a result, for now 100 years, people think that this flu was caused by Spain. That's the same issue here, is the flu is not caused by a country. It is, these diseases are diseases that are medical issues that know no borders, know no politics, know no countries. And in that sense, we have to treat it as a virus, treat it as a medical condition, and not as some issue related to a country.
Asians have been targeted by discriminatory laws and practices since first arriving in the United States. In the early 20th century, many immigrants from China were quarantined and given invasive medical exams without consent or any evidence of disease. Public officials at the time tried to justify anti-immigration legislation by claiming Chinese people specifically were carriers of diseases like smallpox and the bubonic plague.
It seems like when it comes to one race, Asian Americans seem to be singled out. It's okay, it's carte blanche. What's your sense, and how do you turn the corner on that?
This is one of the areas where Asian Americans generally, and certainly Chinese Americans in this case, fall into this what we would call perpetual foreigner syndrome. This syndrome that no matter how long we've been in this country, we are viewed as foreigners. Somehow our loyalties may lie elsewhere. And we have seen this historically, whether it's the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, whether it's the incarceration of Japanese Americans, and I emphasize Americans during World War II on so-called notions of patriotism, or the targeting of Muslim Americans and South Asian Americans after 9/11. Unfortunately, we've seen that throughout history. At the same time, I think it just goes to a structural issue that we have. And this is not just the United States. Many countries have this in terms of seeing other people as foreigners or other people as the other to be feared. And that's where I think, and you see this with the Black Lives Matter movement right now, it's just we're trying to take a reckoning of all of that and trying to come to a better understanding of the fact that we are all better together rather than seeing us as individuals in different ethnic enclaves.
You mentioned all of those particular cases, and I did talk to an individual who was in an internment camp, and he said it's one of the most shameful chapters in American history, and we were all innocent. We were Americans. We cared about our country just as much as anybody else. Given the fact that a lot of people say history repeats itself, when you start to see these kind of incidents shaping up, what's your fear? I mean, because it can go further and further, can't it?
It can go further and further, although I also think that progress is being made. I'm an optimist by nature, and you look at what has happened, certainly even in this current environment where there is at times this fear of China. At the same time, there are politicians that have been very clear about the difference between Chinese government policies versus the Chinese people, trying to distinguish between not racially profiling against Chinese Americans. So you do see elements that make me believe that we are in a better space than we were during World War II. At the same time, that is always a concern. That is always a concern. And you think back, I actually think I've been thinking about this, is when we're in the height of the Cold War against Russia, certainly we had movies against Russia and how the Russians were a threat to the United States. I never perceived that in terms of everyday discourse, there was a suspicion of Russian Americans. I do see an element of that right now with respect to Chinese Americans and then, again, more broadly, Asian Americans. Trying to understand that a little bit more and figuring out what is the root of that and how we really take that root out to get to a better place.
Given the climate that we're in, it's easy to be discouraged about some of the things we've talked about, Kung flu and some of these, the Wuhan fever and all of that sort of thing. But there's the old saying, it's always darkest before the light, before the dawn. Are we seeing a sea change out there? Are you hopeful, or do you think there's still a lot more work that needs to be done?
Both. I am hopeful, and there is a lot more work to be done. What makes me hopeful is seeing Confederate statues come down, especially here in Virginia and elsewhere that were part of the Deep South. That in itself is something that would not have happened 5 years ago, 3 years ago. And to see that happening suggests that we are in a different moment. Now, there's still a lot more work to be done, whether it is on police restructuring or the like. But you do see elements of that. It's interesting, because on the way over here, I was listening to John Lewis's funeral and listening to the stories of the 1960s and how difficult it was then, and some of the, if you call it chaos, some of the uncertainty during that time. That's the other aspect that I come back to, which is people ask me, are we in a moment? Are we in a movement? Is this really that shift? The answer is I don't know. We will know 10 years from now. We will know 15 years from now when that history actually starts to get written. There's a long road, but that road is one that people are taking that journey.
And you'll be on that road for some time to come, I take it.
I believe that's correct. As I tell some people, part of my job as a civil rights organization, our mission is to advance the civil and human rights of Asian Americans and to promote a fair and equitable society for all. So in that sense, if I have promoted a fair and equitable society for all, I am done with my job and I am out of work. Unfortunately, I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Well, we'll let you get back to work. Thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.